The official historical records of ancient Greece present the ruler of Olympus as the ultimate god of cosmic justice. The actual surviving texts document a supreme deity who spent an alarming percentage of his immortality transforming into local wildlife simply to bypass the consent of attractive mortals. The foundational mythology of Western civilization operates as a highly detailed ledger of systematic infidelity and harassment, tracking exactly how one god targeted queens, priestesses, and young men to feed an absolutely relentless lust. Welcome to Just Mythin Around, where myths get weird. Stay with us, because the full scope of what Zeus built through this aggressive biological campaign and what it cost every single person who caught his eye runs deeper than any isolated myth. We are going through all of it. The architecture of a predator. The structural reality of his reign operated as a precise system of physiological subjugation. Every manifestation into an animal or an elemental force served one strict operational purpose: neutralizing the target's ability to perceive the incoming threat. Zeus held an absolute monopoly on atmospheric violence. His lightning bolts functioned as weapons of mass destruction, keeping the other gods terrified and compliant. Every descent into the mortal world advanced a calculated, long-term genetic strategy. By interweaving his divine DNA with mortal royal families, he seeded the entire Hellenic world with demigods and enforcers who owed their existence directly to his bloodline. Mortal monarchs lacked any leverage to refuse him because their entire societal structure depended on his favor for reign and victory in war. The power dynamic remained entirely non-negotiable. The digital pantheon governing our own content operates on the exact same principles of absolute indifference and required sacrifice. So descend into the comment section, leave your offerings of likes and subscriptions, and satisfy the algorithm before it buries this historical chronicle in the digital underworld. Io. The case file of Io begins in the city of Argos. She served as the high priestess of Hera, making her a high-value target on the political landscape. The supreme god deployed a localized atmospheric anomaly, dropping a thick, unnatural fog across the valley of Lerna in broad daylight to hide his assault from the surveillance of Olympus. Hera noticed the sudden weather displacement and immediately descended to investigate. Trapped in the fog with his wife approaching, Zeus violently restructured the priestess's anatomy, forcing her human consciousness into the body of a pristine white heifer. When Hera demanded the animal as a gift, the king of the gods handed Io over without hesitation, cementing her physiological prison. Hera chained the transformed girl to an olive tree and assigned Argus Panoptes to guard her, a primordial giant covered in 100 eyes. Zeus eventually sent his covert operative Hermes to eliminate the guard. Hermes disguised himself as a shepherd, playing a reed pipe until all 100 eyes finally closed before decapitating the giant. Hera retaliated by deploying a demonic horsefly to continuously tear into the heifer's flesh, driving Io into a continent-spanning panic. She fled across the sea, now named the Ionian Sea in her honor. She crossed the strait separating Europe and Asia, known forever after as the Bosphorus, literally translating to cow passage. The psychological torture finally ended on the banks of the Nile in Egypt, where a single touch from Zeus restored her form and resulted in the conception of a son named Epaphus, grounding a new royal dynasty in North Africa. Europa. The targeting vector shifted drastically for the Phoenician princess Europa. She lived entirely removed from the Greek sphere of influence until the sky god noticed her gathering spring flowers on the beach of Tyre. Zeus integrated himself into her father's coastal herds, disguised as a massive white bull. The animal possessed a silver circle on its forehead, horns shaped like crescent moons, and breath smelling of fresh saffron. The biological manipulation of the scent and the animal's unnatural docility lured the princess into a false sense of security. She placed flowers on his horns and eventually climbed onto his broad back. The bull immediately surged into the Mediterranean. The texts document a surreal ocean crossing with Poseidon calming the waves while Tritons blew conch shells to announce the passage of the kidnapped royal. They made landfall on the island of Crete. King Agenor dispatched Europa's brothers on a blind rescue mission with orders never to return without her. Her brother Cadmus eventually abandoned the search and founded the massive fortress city of Thebes. In Crete, Europa received divine compensation, including a bronze automaton named Talos, designed to patrol the island. She gave birth to King Minos, establishing the brutal Minoan civilization, an entire Bronze Age superpower birthed from a single, unpunished kidnapping. Ganymede. High on the slopes of Mount Ida, the Trojan prince Ganymede managed his father's sheep. The boy possessed a genetic perfection that triggered an immediate aerial extraction. Zeus deployed overwhelming force by manifesting as a massive divine eagle plunging from the stratosphere. Its talons hooked into the heavy wool of the boy's garments, ripping him vertically from the mountainside. The speed of the abduction left his tutors and hunting dogs staring uselessly at the sky. The king of the gods required a new cupbearer for his divine banquets and an intimate companion to satisfy his physical appetites, effectively replacing his own daughter Hebe with a kidnapped mortal teenager. Hermes traveled to Troy to deliver a severance package to the devastated King Tros, presenting a team of immortal horses capable of running across water and a golden vine forged by Hephaestus. The boy received the gift of eternal youth, permanently crystallized in his adolescent state to serve the entity that stole his life. The ancient astronomers eventually mapped his frozen image onto the stars as the constellation Aquarius, forcing humanity to navigate its trade routes by the light of a stolen prince. Leda. The events unfolding on the muddy banks of the Eurotas River in Sparta generated the highest casualty count of any divine intervention. Queen Leda bathed in the reeds when the sky violently darkened. A swan plummeted toward the water, visibly exhausted and fleeing from a massive hunting eagle. The entire scenario operated as a fabricated, synchronized military operation. Zeus played the desperate victim to weaponize the queen's basic empathy. She sheltered the trembling bird against her body and triggered the trap. The biological impossibility following this physiological subjugation produced two distinct eggs containing completely fragmented genetic material. The shells cracked to reveal 4 children with a chaotic mixture of mortal and divine DNA. From the mortal king, Tyndareus, came the son, Castor, and the daughter, Clytemnestra. From the divine extraction came the immortal boxer, Pollux, and the weaponized perfection of Helen. This single infiltration destabilized the entire Mediterranean. Helen's existence inevitably sparked the Trojan War, resulting in 10 years of siege warfare and the burning of an empire. The mortal daughter, Clytemnestra, married the Greek commander Agamemnon. He sacrificed their own daughter to secure favorable sailing winds for his fleet. Clytemnestra waited a decade for his return, trapped him in a bathhouse net, and butchered him with an axe. The greatest blood feuds of the ancient world all trace back to a weaponized swan exploiting a moment of kindness. Alcmene. The case of Alcmene represents a masterpiece of psychological infiltration. She resided in the heavily fortified citadel of Thebes. Her absolute loyalty to her husband Amphitryon made her completely immune to animal disguises or forceful abductions. Amphitryon commanded a brutal military campaign against the Teleboans miles away. Zeus bypassed the stone walls by executing a flawless replication of the returning general, assuming his exact physical dimensions, the dirt of the campaign, and his precise vocal cadence. The impostor presented the golden chalice of King Tereleus to cement the illusion. Zeus then manipulated the fundamental mechanics of the solar system, ordering the sun god, Helios, not to rise, and extending the night to triple its normal duration. Alcmene experienced 36 hours of deep emotional connection with a phantom. The real husband arrived the following morning with the exact same golden cup and the exact same stories. The mathematical impossibility resulted in a supernatural twin pregnancy. Heracles carried the explosive DNA of the sky god, while his twin brother, Iphicles, carried the mortal DNA of the general. The supreme god secured his ultimate hero. Hera immediately dispatched twin serpents to the nursery to initiate a lifetime of psychological torture against a child conceived through absolute gaslighting. Semele. The political warfare inside the divine family regularly turned mortal women into collateral damage. The Theban princess Semele caught the attention of Zeus. The supreme god infiltrated her royal chambers in the palace of Thebes every night, concealing his divine nature under the cover of darkness and remaining exclusively an invisible nocturnal lover. Hera recognized a critical vulnerability in this secrecy and descended to the mortal city, disguising herself as Beroe, Semele's trusted elderly nurse from childhood. Operating from a position of absolute trust, the disguised goddess planted a microscopic seed of doubt. She warned the young princess that her mysterious visitor might actually be a monster masking itself in the darkness. The manipulation flawlessly turned the girl's anxiety into a demand for absolute proof. When the unseen lover returned, Semele extracted a binding oath upon the subterranean waters of the river Styx, an ancient contract forcing compliance from the king of the gods. She asked to see him in the exact unshielded glory he displayed in the halls of Olympus. Zeus dropped the atmospheric dampening fields protecting mortal retinas, manifesting his true elemental nature inside a stone bedroom. The raw plasma and blinding voltage instantly ignited the princess, reducing her biological shell to a scorched shadow. The supreme god extracted the surviving fetal tissue from the flames and sliced open his own thigh to create a makeshift flesh incubator. Dionysus emerged months later from his father's leg, growing into the god of wine and madness, who eventually tore through the underworld to drag his burned mother's soul out of the darkness. Metis. A paralyzing terror of succession drove the supreme god's internal policy. Zeus knew the mathematical certainty of the cosmos. Sons eventually sever the power of their fathers, just as he had violently overthrown his own father, Cronus. His first wife, Metis, possessed the intellect of deep thought and wisdom. An ancient prophecy warned that Metis would bear a daughter of equal power, and then a son with enough strength to shatter the throne of heaven. Zeus neutralized the threat through absolute ingestion. He challenged his highly intelligent pregnant wife to a game of shape-shifting, manipulating her ego until she transformed into a small fly. The architect of Olympus swallowed her whole, trapping infinite wisdom inside his own digestive tract. Metis continued to function from within his biology, forging armor inside his skull until the cranial pressure became agonizing. Zeus stumbled to the shores of Lake Triton, where the god of the forge, Hephaestus, swung a bronze axe into the king's head. The skull split wide open, releasing Athena into the world fully grown, wearing battle armor and screaming a war cry. Female intelligence emerged completely digested and reborn in a structurally safe format. A powerful enforcer lacking a mother, unconditionally loyal to the patriarchal system that literally consumed her origins. Persephone. The ledger of his victims extended beyond his own lovers to include his own bloodline. Persephone was the direct daughter of Zeus and the harvest goddess Demeter. When his subterranean brother Hades desired the young goddess, the supreme god treated his own child exactly like his mortal targets, as a political asset. The administrative protocol of his regime granted the father the legal right to distribute female family members without consulting the mother or the victim. Zeus completely bypassed her consent with a single, quiet nod of approval. Persephone gathered flowers on the plains of Nuos when she spotted a deeply luminescent narcissus flower with 100 blooms. The moment she pulled the specifically engineered snare from the soil, the earth violently ruptured. Black horses burst from the fault line, dragging the screaming girl into the lightless zones of the underworld. Zeus observed the entire abduction of his daughter from his throne and offered zero intervention. Demeter discovered the political betrayal and responded by initiating a total atmospheric strike. She withdrew her biological function from the soil. The crops withered into dust, the rivers slowed, and the global food supply violently collapsed. The supreme god ignored the mass casualties until the crisis threatened his own revenue stream. He intervened only when the altars stopped burning with sacrificial meat and the smoke of roasting fat ceased to reach his nostrils. He dispatched Hermes to retrieve the girl, but Hades had already deployed a physiological failsafe by feeding her the seeds of a pomegranate. The strict biological laws of the cosmos dictate that consuming any physical matter from the realm of the dead permanently integrates the consumer into the underworld ecosystem. This forced consumption of subterranean food legally bound her to the shadows, resulting in a compromised seasonal return, permanently chaining the earth to an endless cycle of freezing death and desperate rebirth, all because the king of the gods treated his daughter as a piece of property. The mythological record of the ancient Greeks functions as a psychological mirror reflecting the horrific realities of absolute, unchecked authority. The ancient stories of magical animals and divine romance operate strictly as the fossilized remains of human trauma, mapping the exact strategies utilized by powerful entities to extract what they want while maintaining their systemic dominance. Zeus embodies the ultimate behavioral pattern of a predator who builds the very laws he routinely violates, demanding worship for the order he provides while actively generating the chaos that ruins mortal lives. The myths fixate on these real states of powerlessness and violation, forcing the victims to bear the consequences while the architect watches from the clouds. Before the algorithm pushes you toward the next piece of digital content, ensure you leave your mark. Interact with the sacrificial buttons below to keep this channel functioning, and drop a name in the comments to dictate which ancient system of terror we deconstruct next.
This was just Mythin Around. Knowledge is a weapon. Keep it sharp.